All right, so our next topic is looking into the ABC model and setting events. Once a behavior is clearly defined, the next logical step is to examine why it happens. We're going to do this using the ABC model, and this model will help us understand behavior patterns and triggers. We're also going to examine setting events, which provide important context about the bigger picture influencing behaviors. We'll start here with the ABC model, and this is one of the most important tools you'll use to understand behavior. A stands for antecedent, and the antecedent is what happens right before the behavior occurs. B is the behavior, and the behavior, as we know, is the observable, measurable action that the student does that we can see or measure or track. And that's the best way to describe the behavior, is to operationally define it. And C stands for the consequence. And the consequence is what happens right after the behavior occurs. It could be that attention is given, that the student is allowed to escape a demand or access the tangible they need or the sensory that they had requirements to have or need. Why does it matter to look at behavior this way at all? Because the ABC model helps us start to figure out the function, the why behind a behavior. It lets us make smart, data-informed decisions about what's actually reinforcing the behavior and what's keeping it, meaning we're trying to figure out what's keeping it going. Once we start to understand the pattern, we can make changes to behavior, to instruction, or to the consequences that are ultimately meant to support better behavioral reactions from a student. In short, if we want to change the behavior, we also need to understand the behavior. And to understand it, sometimes we need a roadmap, and the ABC model serves as a pretty good roadmap for a lot of us. Let's look at a real life example together. A antecedent in this scenario is when a teacher gives the class a math worksheet. B, the behavior that we observed is that the student uses force to tear paper into two or more pieces. So it goes like this. That's using force to tear something into two pieces, crumpling it up into a ball and throwing it into a trash can while simultaneously shouting Kobe loud enough to be heard by others in the classroom. When I say it's a real life example, I meant it. C, the consequence in this example is that the student is sent out into the hallway. Immediately after they do this action, they throw the ball, they shout out for Kobe. The teacher says, go out into the hallway. Now, what function could this behavior that the student engaged in actually be trying to serve? It could be escape. Maybe the student doesn't feel comfortable, confident doing math. So being in the hallway, even though it looks like punishment, is actually relieving the pressure of performing or demanding that I do math worksheets right now. What about attention? Maybe the student is like wicked smart and is in some sort of intellectual power struggle with this teacher, and try the behavior that they're engaging in is a way of getting attention to show that, like, I don't need to do this. I'm smarter than this work here, because maybe they actually are. And that's a whole other issue or behavior we have to deal with. It could be also something else entirely. By breaking things down into their antecedent, into the description of the behavior and the consequence, it really helps us look deeper than just a bad behavior is happening. We're trying to understand what's enforcing this behavior to occur. Like, why is it happening? We're trying to really get down in there. Okay, it's your turn. Let's look at a very simple scenario and try to identify the antecedent, behavior, and consequence. For this practice scenario, let's just use a very simple definition of the behavior as it's described here. Let's break it down together. The antecedent is what happens right before the behavior occurs. In this case, it's independent reading time, and that's when Jonah starts tapping his pencil. The observable action that is the behavior is what Jonah actually does. So here it would be that he's tapping his pencil loudly on the desk. Again, for this exercise, we are keeping the definition simple, though we can definitely become more specific and operationally define the behavior far more extensively if needed. Now, the consequence, or what happens immediately after this behavior occurs, is that the teacher first says, please stop. And then after Jonah keeps going, the teacher lets him move to the back of the classroom to read alone. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Let's think about why or what Jonah might be trying to get or avoid. Could it be attention from the teacher? Maybe at first when he kept tapping the pencil and the teacher did something, maybe that was some sort of attention. But once he's moved to the back of the room, is he getting attention? Is he getting something different? Does he want a quieter space? Is there less pressure because nobody can see him and know whether or not he's reading in the back of the room? Is there a really cool like swivel chair back there that he wants access to because everybody always wants to sit in the really cool swivel chair? Or is the back of the room actually closest to the door that they leave to go out for recess? And he's just recess comes immediately after independent reading. He's trying to be the first one out there. There could be so many other reasons in these, or there could be so many reasons why a student like Jonah is engaging in this behavior. We would need more data and more understanding to know for sure, but we can actually start to make some smart guesses when we track the ABCs. And we'll also be able to start making some smart guesses because we know what our classroom is. We start to know a little bit more about Jonah, about what happens next in the day or what happened before in that day. All those additional contextual information really do help. And we can break it down by starting to use our ABC model here. Now, let's take it one step further and talk about setting events. Setting events are conditions or experiences that happen well before the ABC sequence, sometimes hours or even days before, but they still influence how likely a behavior is to occur. Think of setting events like background noise. It can either turn the volume up or down on a student's reactions. So, for example, I'll use myself. If I got only 4 hours of sleep and I skipped breakfast, and then this morning I spilled coffee on myself, then guess what? I'm probably going to be more irritable, less patient, more likely to snap at something minor the minute I'm asked to do something at work when I walk in. That whatever the trigger is, it might be really small, but I'm already primed to react because of everything that happened in that morning. All the stage has been set for my reaction or behavior to occur in the moment. The same thing happens with students. If a student had a chaotic morning at home, they missed their medication, they didn't eat, their family has been in a fight for 5 days, the bus ride is stressful, they just fought with their best friend in the hallway. Those are all setting events that can lower someone's tolerance or ability to like self-correct and raise and those setting events, they raise the chances of challenging behaviors happening. And we don't usually know what they are or what the issues those setting events are. We may come to find them out. Importantly, we know that the setting events don't cause the behavior, but they increase the likelihood that a student's going to react strongly to whatever is triggering them in that moment. And why does it matter? Well, as educators, as people who are often on the receiving end of these behaviors, we often jump straight into what we see, the behavior and the immediate consequence. But being aware of the setting events will also help us interpret behavior more compassionately and help us actually plan proactively. If we know that a student is coming into our classrooms dysregulated, hungry, we might be able to adjust our expectations to offer a sensory break, a breakfast snack, change the order of activities that might better support them. That level of insight into our students' backgrounds essentially can really help prevent any escalation of behavior before it starts. These also we don't just get to know what these setting events are. We have to get this information through knowing our students, to talking to their support networks, their families, to really kind of being the observer and outreach advocate and around their behavior to really see what's happening. And that's when you start to learn there's a little bit more context that we needed. And of course, we won't know if, especially if the student won't tell us and doesn't tell us. But again, once we do know, if we can know, it gives us a really important lens for understanding behavior and context. The bottom line is that once we get information about setting events, they really help us shift from what's wrong with the student to what happened to the student and how can I help them move past today. I want to also pause and talk about why really even bother going through all of this. And it comes down to one fundamental truth about this class, and I said at the very beginning, our first set of videos, behavior is communication. Our students, people in general, are constantly trying to tell something through their actions. The question is, are you listening? And do we know how to interpret what they're saying? That's where identifying function is going to come in. Because when we understand the purpose of behavior is trying to serve, that function, right, we can make much better decisions about how to respond. Think about it like this. If you're trying to calm a student who is throwing pencils to get attention and your strategy is to ignore them or just give them like a solo worksheet, you're not really addressing the reason why the behavior started. Or let's say a student keeps leaving the classroom without permission and the response is to send them to the office. But what if they're leaving to escape a difficult task? The consequence is actually reinforcing their behavior. You're giving them what they wanted in that situation. Function drives strategy. It's like using a magnifying glass. We don't just look at the behavior. We zoom in to figure out why it's happening. We look at the behavior because that's the first thing that's raising all the alarm bells, but we got to get deeper in there. And once we do get deeper in there and we can figure out what's happening, we can choose interventions that actually work. And what this ends up meaning, hopefully in the long run, is spending less time trying things and throwing things at a wall and seeing if that's going to work, when we can maybe selectively choose things that are specifically attacking why that behavior is occurring. Now, how do we actually track our antecedents, behaviors, and consequences in real classroom, especially if you're the only adult in the room? This is similar to what we talked about in the tracking data portion of our operational definitions video, and it's going to come down to keeping it simple. Use sticky notes, a clipboard, voice memo, whatever works for you, use it and use it consistently. Then I would suggest picking one student and one behavior to focus on at a time. Again, you are just a human. You cannot actively do 700 things at once, but you can record just one student, one behavior at a time. We're going to use your natural breaks, those time in between classes, maybe a switching around of class periods, maybe when your students head to lunch or they're getting ready for their next specials class, whatever the situation may be. Use those natural breaks to jot down some of your thoughts and your notes. It's a little bit more observational. You're not writing a novel, certainly not. You're just taking quick, meaningful notes about what you observed. And if you have a paraeducator, a co-teacher, a student teacher, use them. The more eyes, the better, as long as they also understand what they're supposed to be tracking. I want you to remember that you cannot fix what you cannot see. You have to be able to see it to fix it and track that behavior. Tracking the behavior is the first step to doing this. We're going to take a moment here to pause and reflect.